Good afternoon, fellow Patriots. This is Matt Shea, and welcome to Patriot Radio, broadcasting live from the capital of free Washington, Spokane Valley. Brought to you once again by the committee to elect Matt Shea, Republican, in the legacy of Dr. Stan Monteith, bringing you the story behind the story. And the news behind the news is not about right or left. It's about right and wrong. It's about being an American again. That is a good thing. And I just want to say thank you to everybody for your patience over the last couple of weeks. I have been very ill since I got back from session, and just thank you all for your prayers. Still hanging on just a little bit, but hope we get through the show, no problem with the voice. But thank you, everybody, for all the well wishes. Really appreciate it. And as I always say, our hope is not in man, but in Jesus Christ, and we can't end in prayer. We must also move to action. And as Ephesians 2:5-6 says, God made us alive together with Christ and raised us up with him and seated us with him in the heavenly places in Christ Jesus. You know what that means? If we're abiding in Christ and Christ is abiding in us, everything that is under Christ's feet is under our feet. That means we should not be walking around defeated. We should walk around victorious. We should be secure in our identity in Jesus Christ. We should be secure in the fact that we are beloved, that we matter, that we are his sons and daughters. And I love that verse. It's very encouraging, especially after the last 2 weeks of session, which were the most challenging 2 weeks I have experienced in 10 years in the legislature, no question about it. And we will get to all of that here in a bit. I do have a little bit of breaking news, but I'm gonna wait for that. I have some breaking news on the Bundy trial situation down in Nevada. Now, most of you have said, well, that's over. Well, not quite. And you're going to want to hear what happened this afternoon. I was able to speak with AM Bundy about an hour ago, and so I do have some breaking news on that. But I want to move first to the international front into the Middle East. And first of all, very important. Now, we left off last time I was on the show talking about Turkey invading the northern part of Syria, and they did. Well, what was not in the news is that the Kurdish militias that are U.S.-backed went toe-to-toe with the Turks. Well, finally, the Turks won and took the town of Afrin, and they are going to be moving farther in. At least that's what Erdogan is claiming, that they're going to continue farther into Syria. Here's the important part. Anytime people say in the news or you hear a report out of the Middle East, U.S.-backed whatever, there's an implication that U.S. Special Forces are on the ground working with some of those people. So I want you to understand you have two NATO countries on either side of the battle line. That is a flashpoint, folks. Also talked about last time the fact that 200 Russian advisors and Russian-backed forces were hit by U.S. forces directly in Syria. Again, another flashpoint. And it is interesting now that we have a couple reports coming out of Israel. And the first I want to highlight this because I think it's important to understand the context of more of what is happening. Now, the Israelis have been doing incursions into Syria. But this new development kind of shows a shift is going to happen over there. And this is coming from, again, Debka file, that the United States Central Command is going to transfer its base in Qatar to Saudi Arabia, and that it would be closing its base in Incirlik, Turkey. Now, I don't want to speculate as to exactly what the motivations are, but let's look at the implications of this. First of all, the Turkish president has become a big supporter of the Emir of Qatar. Okay, so you have Erdogan forming an alliance with Qatar, okay? And that has been against the Saudis and to a lesser extent against the Iranians as well. But again, this is a flashpoint and indicates that if the United States is moving out of those two places, that perhaps it is becoming clear they are aligning with the Saudis in this very difficult part of the Middle East. In addition to that, rumors are floating that Trump will abrogate the Iran deal. So you have what appears to be the aligning Saudi Arabia, United States, and Israel, and Egypt, and the United Arab Emirates. And then you have the Turks and Qatar, and you have the Iranians, the Syrians, and to a limited extent the Russians. This really kind of begs several questions, but when you see these big moves like this with bases, that can give you an indication of what is going to happen in the future. And again, I don't want to speculate, but really the implication seems pretty clear that these lines are becoming starker and starker. In addition to that, and this is one of the most fascinating articles out of the Middle East this last week, absolutely fascinating. But I've talked on the show before that the Sanhedrin has been reconstituted for the first time in, 1,000 years. And of the 71 members of the Sanhedrin, 23 apparently, and pay attention, this is pretty incredible actually, but apparently 23 of these members of the Sanhedrin have drafted a letter, and they're seeking to get signatures of the rest of the Sanhedrin. And this was prepared by these rabbis. And here's the quote. I want to read the quote from a couple quotes from this letter and also from the article that's coming to us from WorldNet Daily. Okay, first, the time has come to rebuild the temple on Mount Moriah in Jerusalem in its ancient place. End quote. So this letter is advocating the rebuilding of the third temple. The article goes on to talk about the fact that these rabbis want to work with the Muslim community over there to make this actually happen. You heard me right what I just said. They want to work with the Muslim community over there to make this happen. Now, this has some implications for people that study eschatology, obviously. But there's another there's another quote that came out of this. Okay? A couple quotes I'll read. And you have to understand that you can't just take one single quote by itself. But I think it's really, really, really important to hear this. Okay, quote, "The move is intended to bring the entire world one step closer to global peace that will characterize the Messianic era," end quote. Then the next quote, this is coming from another rabbi, quote, "The Sanhedrin is inviting them to benefit from this since the temple is good for the whole world. This universal aspect is essential to what the temple is, a house for all nations," end quote. Now, obviously, this is another flashpoint, right? Because if you have the temple built over there, I don't think that the Muslim community over there is going to accept this and just allow it to happen. And if it does, there's going to have to be some sort of a peace treaty struck. Now, I'm going to leave it there, not speculate on anything, but the fact that this letter has been drafted in requesting that the third temple be built now, I think just is one more point of contention in the Middle East. All right. Also on the international front, and I have to say this because I wasn't able to broadcast around St. Patrick's Day, but Ireland beat England in rugby on St. Patrick's Day, and Gonzaga also won. That's a good St. Patrick's Day right there for those of Irish descent. Also on the international front, I want to talk about China. A series of articles this last week came forward that raised the specter of war potentially with China. in the future. But one of the most startling parts of this, and we've been talking about this for a while, but it's finally being admitted by mainstream media, is that China is weaponizing big data. That means that the Chinese will hack, and we have the statistics on this here in Washington State, that while the majority of hacks occur in the business sector, the actual number of records hacked is about 10 times greater in the government sector. In other words, the government becomes the repository for a large amount of records, and that becomes a target of international espionage. And China weaponizing big data, what does that mean? Well, it means that they are also, as part of their strategy, engaging in low-level cyber warfare to gain information on U.S. citizens and to create profiles on every citizen so that they can introduce other cyber warfare things. Could be a fake Facebook page, could be all kinds of different things to influence areas of the population. Even more interesting than that, you have finally an admission, and this is coming from Navy and Marine Corps leaders, coming from thehill.com, that China is expanding its global reach as a superpower and is rapidly buying up foreign assets, foreign to, obviously, to China. But they are buying up foreign assets, particularly foreign land, is part of their geopolitical strategy. So the Chinese are coming into foreign countries and they're buying up tons of land and also infrastructure, ports, etc., as part of their warfare strategy. And they're weaponizing, in other words, capital, the means of production. But more importantly, too, than the means of production, also the infrastructure that moves capital and also moves what is produced. It's important to understand that. So the Chinese are doing that. Then, on top of that, there was another article about the Chinese essentially engaging in space warfare. Now, that doesn't really come as a huge shock, probably to a lot of people. But, what might come as a shock is that there is some concern. This is coming to us from Free Beacon. There is some concern that the Chinese are actually ahead of the United States in space warfare technology. In other words, the counterattacks against U.S. satellites and also any weaponized satellites that might be out there. So this is really beginning to ramp up. Now, a lot of people have analyzed, would the Chinese ever invade the United States of America, et cetera, et cetera. Here's the bottom line. They are going to expand their influence in Southeast Asia, okay? They are going to expand their influence to a certain extent in Southwest Asia, the Middle East. But in Southeast Asia, they will start there. They do not have a big enough blue water navy to do any sort of force projection because it takes a lot to project force. But we're seeing some precursors to certain things, and I'm going to get into a couple here really quick. First of all, we've got what people are calling a trade war brewing with China. I want people to understand something about economics, and one of these things about economics is that if you're going to raise tariffs, you have to lower the income tax of the whole people, and you can raise tariffs, okay? Because what that does is offset any increase in prices that you might have. People aren't really talking about it in those terms, but that's the economic reality that is out there. But historically, trade wars precede shooting wars. And that's one of the bigger concerns. The other is monetary wars, and I want to get to that here on the national front. First of all, the Fed has raised interest rates. It looks like they will again the next time they meet. So they're going to continue raising interest rates. And people have been really focused on that. What we really should be focused on is something that has come from Jim Rickards. Now, Jim Rickards was a CIA analyst. He's very well respected. But he tweeted this, and I want you to understand the implication of this. The IMF aims for digital crypto SDR as world money. So the SDR, special drawing rights, out of Switzerland, Bank of International Settlements in Switzerland, Basel, Switzerland. They want to turn those special drawing rights into a digital cryptocurrency. What that means is that there would no longer be a need for the petrodollar. There'd no longer be a need for U.S. dollars to trade in because you could settle everything in this new digital cryptocurrency because special drawing rights are a basket of currencies. And so China would be wanting to advocate for this because it would mean less U.S. money control over the world economy. And that's where we get into, you have a trade war, you have a potential monetary war. Those all precede a shooting war, and that's why we need to be ever vigilant. But again, I think it's going to start in Southeast Asia. I think you're going to see some saber rattling, not just on the Korean Peninsula, but you'll see saber rattling in Vietnam. You'll see saber rattling in Taiwan and the rest of the South China Sea as well. All right. Also on the national front, the head, this did not receive much press, by the way, at all, but the head of the U.S. Forest Service resigned, apparently because of impropriety. And there was an ongoing misconduct investigation, and he resigned. It seems to me that instead of looking at term limits for politicians, we should start looking at term limits for bureaucrats. And there has to be a check in the system because you have the documented corruption inside the BLM that has come out. You have this. You have other allegations, even inside the DOJ. So obviously there's something we need to do policy-wise to rein in bureaucrats. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later in the show. Also on the national front today, McMaster is out. John Bolton is in as a national security advisor, a move that some are criticizing, some are happy about, but either way, Trump making some very significant foreign policy moves in the last week. His bringing in of Bolton clearly brings in a more anti-United Nations and tough on China approach to foreign policy. So you're kind of seeing where the shifts are occurring right now. All right, on the regional front, there was a interesting occurrence that happened down in Utah. Nobody was hurt, but you didn't hear about this in the news. It was on NBC News local there in Utah, but it didn't make national news the way it probably should have. An ISIS-inspired teen, so this teen had connected with ISIS online, brought a homemade bomb to school that was discovered in a backpack emitting smoke, and it prompted an evacuation of the school. Now, this is amid all of the other gun control stuff that's happening around the United States right now, but I find it interesting that this was not made nationally. Are they going to have bomb-free zones for schools? Well, they already should be, right? This did not fit the gun narrative and therefore was not reported on. And so we're going to report on it here on Patriot Radio. Also, on the regional front, the 51st state continuing a huge push. We have boomed. It has been unbelievable how fast this movement is growing. We have county captains in most of the counties in eastern Washington. If you want to be a county captain and you don't know if your county is part of this movement, or there's anybody in the county that's working on the movement, contact me. I'd love to get you in touch with our team. We have flags now. They're for sale online. These flags can be flown, anywhere you want them to be as long as they're done according to the flag code. But what that means is when you fly that Liberty flag, you've claimed that ground for liberty. That's what's important. And it doesn't matter what the people on the west side of the state say. We are claiming this ground for liberty. And so I'm sure you'll like the flag. We also have another vote up. We had the vote closed on the state seal. We opened a new vote up on the state animal. You can take a look at that. It's kind of a fun thing for the kids to weigh in on. But this movement is continuing to grow. We're doing a huge push over the summer. I'm traveling around and giving speeches in the different counties. If you want a speech in your county, please contact us. I'd love to get there and give you the presentation. Okay, also on the regional front, want to do a real quick session wrap-up from the legislature. I'm going to go down this pretty quick, okay, because this was really pretty terrible, some of the stuff that was passed. First of all, they killed almost all of my bills, including the civil asset forfeiture reform bill, the off-road vehicle bill, the biochar bill. Biochar is something that you can make from the undergrowth of forests, and you can use it to remediate the soil in our agricultural areas. But they killed those bills. Here's what they passed, okay? They wanted a bill for automatic voter registration at birth. But they decided on 16. So before somebody's eligible to vote, automatic voter registration at 16. A requirement for paying for abortifacients. Okay, these are, some people try to argue with me on this. These are like the Plan B pill that cause embryonic death. Okay, so that's what these are. They want it to be part of your insurance policy. You would have to fund it whether you believed in it or not. Okay, also, they passed a bump stock ban, Senate Bill 5992. Look, they're not going to stop there. They had an assault weapons ban out there, magazine registry. Gun confiscation has already started with these red flag laws. Already in Seattle, person not convicted of a crime, person not charged with a crime, no warrant, and they lose their firearms. That's the kind of stuff that people said 10 years ago would never happen. Folks, it is here and is happening. It is why we got to show up. And by the way, this year we were able to kill a lot of the bad stuff, but that is a dress rehearsal for next year. That's what it is. They're going to bring all this stuff back. Okay, also, they passed paid surrogacy, so rent a womb. In other words, a woman can rent her womb out for money. You also have abortion for all. In other words, every insurance policy now will have to require abortion be paid for, and now you're going to be funding against something you don't believe in. Unreal. And oh, by the way, our property taxes are going up, and we tried to get property tax relief, but they didn't want to go there again. We were able to stop the carbon tax. We were able to stop the capital gains income tax. We were able to stop low carbon fuel standard, which would add 20 cents per gallon of gasoline. So we were able to stop some of that bad stuff, but just one more session of more regulation, even though we stopped some of that. So I don't want you to be discouraged, but I do want you to be informed of the reality of where we're at in Washington. And if you have never been involved in politics before, you need to get involved now, because eventually politics is going to be involved in you. And the trajectory of Washington State is determined by 2 votes. That's it. And if we get involved and we get out there, we can change that around. All right. Get to the breaking news in the Bundy case down in Nevada. Now, I talked to AM Bundy about an hour and a half ago, I guess now, and apparently there is a new, Larry Wooten email. There was a motion for reconsideration that was put forward by the United States, reconsideration of this dismissal of the trial, and Larry Wooten apparently wrote an email in regards to this. Now, we don't know the exact content, but last night, the U.S. District Attorney apparently filed a motion, a protective order, for this email to keep it out of the sight of the public. And apparently the judge has temporarily granted that protective order. So we need to get this out kind of far and wide, because Larry Wooten sent this email not just to the court, but apparently sent this to the Department of Justice and also to the President of the United States. And as I get more information on this, I want to share it with you. But I want you to share this far and wide, that there is something else out there that we don't know. And I believe, after all of the misconduct that has been revealed in this case, that the public deserves to know. So, breaking news right here on Patriot Radio. I don't know of anybody else that has that information and is broadcasting it. So you heard it here first. Tell your friends and family. It's not over, folks. March, it's not over. Okay. On the local front, the Red Pill Expo coming up here June 21st through 23rd, downtown Spokane. There are tickets available right now, but there's a lot of great speakers coming. You can also apparently do it via streaming. So just wanted to tell everybody about the Red Pill Expo. It's a big deal coming here to Spokane, Washington. There were a lot of people there last year in Montana, and this brings in all of the great speakers from all over the country. Alex Newman, G. Edward Griffin, Patrick Wood, Tom DeWeese, all the people that you love to hear on this show. They're going to be at Red Pill, including apparently Robert Kiyosaki as well. Many of you know him from Rich Dad Poor Dad series. All right, lastly on the local front, Cliven Bundy, American Patriot, with Mike Stickler here at Center Place here in the Valley at 7 p.m. tomorrow night. If you're interested, it's a free event as I understand it. So look forward to seeing all of you there and hearing kind of an inside perspective of what went on. But we're going to hear a little bit of that inside perspective here in a couple of minutes. And that's the briefing. Remember the antidote to dependency and socialism is to be a God-fearing, self-reliant, freedom-loving American. Thank you to everybody that has been praying for me, especially the whole session. Just thank you so much for the support. And make sure you go to Facebook/Patriot Radio, like the page, share it with your friends and family. And remember, too, that this is a listener-supported show. You can always go to vote.com and help keep us on the air, help keep freedom, liberty, truth out on the airwaves. Well, my guest today is Mike Stickler. He's the author of Cliven Bundy, American Patriot. I really appreciate you waiting for the long catch-up for the last couple weeks, and thanks for being on here, and really glad to have you in our neck of the woods and speaking tomorrow night.
Matt, it's really a privilege, and actually it was just really great to hear all the news that's going on and the great work that you guys are doing. Really need to keep it up. I just hope and pray that it'll happen and spread across the country, especially those countries, part of the country where people are living in those red states, those flyover states, that they would lift their voices up, get organized, and make a difference. So good for you.
Well, I hope so too, because it's we're all part of a team, right? Team America, if you will, and it's just becoming Americans again. It's so interesting to me that has become not the normal, and I just think here in the West, particularly, we have that opportunity because living so close to the land and farming and logging and ranching and everything, we have kept those values and preserved them, and it's now time for us to reintroduce them to the rest of America, I think, especially urban America.
It's really true. I've been traveling around the country promoting Cliven's story and sharing it, and I've been going to some of the most remote places here in the U.S. and just meeting folks, just good, down-to-earth, God-fearing, wonderful people who understand what it means to work for a living, and they really just have had enough. They've just had enough, and they really want to speak up and change the trajectory of the nation that they love so much. And it's guys like you that are just really helping lead the way. So we appreciate it.
Well, we're all doing our part. You've actually done your part, and that's what I really want to focus on. Can you tell the listeners a little bit about your story, how you met Cliven, kind of your thoughts and impressions about not just him, but the whole case and everything that has just come to fruition here over the last year?
Yeah, what's unique about me is that I've actually come into this whole story very late in the game. I only met Cliven Bundy in April of last year, of 2017. And the main reason, though I am a Nevadan, and I remember very clearly the standoff in 2014, I was having my own struggles with the federal government at that time. In fact, in 2014, I had been indicted by the government and was facing my own criminal trials and civil trials. And so just what I knew about Cliven and all of the Bundys was just kind of in passing and what the news had told me. And then they didn't come back onto my radar until 2016 with Ammon and Ryan and all the men and women that were in Malyard had not only gone to Malyard, but were gone through a federal trial and was released. And I remember the day, because I was in prison by that time in California. All of us gathered together in the chapel in the prison in Lompoc, California, and we prayed and thanked God that they were acquitted. And I understood some of the challenges that they had. I've been in agriculture and have business interests, and living in northern Nevada, we were surrounded by the BLM, especially over the wild horse issues up there. And so it resonated with me, but I really didn't know that much about them. And as I was completing my 30-month prison sentence, they were bringing me back from California back to Nevada to release me actually in Las Vegas. And I was stuck in the very same unit as Cliven Bundy in Pahrump, Nevada. And thinking I was only going to be there a day or two, I ended up staying there for almost 2 months. That's how I met him.
So what was your impression of him? You know, he's been demonized by certain sectors of America. What was your impression of him? I mean, just as a man, as a human being?
That's a great question. You know, honestly, when I first got there, I had a couple of inmates had told me he was there, and I said, you know, you're from Nevada, you should go over and say hello to him. And so it took me a day or two before I wandered over and sat down and I said, you know, Mr. Bundy, I'm Mike Stickler, and, you know, I just want you to know that I'm a Nevadan, and we've been praying for you, and I want you just to know there's a lot of people that care about you. He looked at me and he said, Mike, sit down, tell me about yourself. And what was unique and something I hadn't really experienced for a couple of years now is he meant it. He genuinely wanted me to tell him about me and my life and my background and my experiences. And so, Matt, I'll be honest with you, going into that first day of meeting Cliven, I really kind of anticipated, because I'd only seen the media, a little bit of the media account, I anticipated, you know, Cliven being kind of a wackadoo. I really did. I expected him to be one of these conspiracy theorists, you know, and in a short amount of time as we sat and talked, I was going to, you know, we were going to get little tinfoil hats out and whatnot. But what ended up happening is I found a man, like so many other ranchers I know, hundreds of, who is just a down-to-earth, honest guy who really wants to make a difference in this country. And the truth is he just had enough. He had enough of the federal bureaucrats pushing him around. And he decided he was going to make a stand. And not just a stand if it was going to cost him the rest of his life, he thought it was worth it. And over the next 2 months that I was there with him, I really became friends with Cliven. Didn't start out there. And the first couple weeks, really about a first week and a half, we talked about agriculture and raising cows and places we had cowboyed before and horses we'd ridden, and it was a pleasant diversion from the craziness of being in that institution and the people we were living with. And then after about a week and a half or so, I finally just asked him, you know, Cliven, why don't you tell me, you know, what happened? You know, how did this all go? And why did you have a standoff? And what was your side? And so that afternoon, he just sat down and he started explaining to me a little bit about what he refers to it as a protest against the sheriffs, what the media refers to it as a standoff. He told me the story of how he got there, what was going on. One of the interesting things that Cliven does is when he talks, he gets out his notepad and he begins to sketch it out. You know, as he talks, he likes to draw just kind of rudimentary drawings. And as he's doing those rudimentary drawings, he's just showing me where the stage was and where the Toquap Wash was and where his headquarters is. And the more we talked and the more he told me about the story, the more I became fascinated by it. But you got to remember, I was only going to be there for a couple days, so I really wasn't thinking about writing a book. I was actually just thinking about going home. And after I'd been there a while, I finally, especially after I heard about the Longbow Productions, where the FBI had infiltrated his family, I just looked at him. I said, Cliven, you've got to write a book and tell people your story. I probably said that about 2 or 3 times, and he said, you know what? Why don't you write it, Mike? And I was kind of set back. And I prayed about it, and a couple of days later I said, you know what? I'm willing to write your book, but I only want your story. I'm not interested in anything else but your side of this. And once we kind of came to that agreement, I spent the next 6 weeks interviewing him and writing down his story. And it was really quite eye-opening. And just the genuineness and the sensibility about why he made a stand that was so significant. And if you really understand his story, I think anybody that loves this country would say the same thing. Enough. I don't want to be pushed around anymore. So much so that he was willing to risk his entire life, all of his possessions, to be incarcerated for the rest of his life.
Well, what stood out to you as part of his story? Because there are a lot of ranchers out there that I've talked to that have very similar stories, from Oregon and Washington to Nevada, and they all have kind of a common thread. But I want to hear your take on that. I mean, what did he share with you that kind of stood out, and as you've traveled around, really has been affirmed by people you've talked to?
I think the most interesting thing about Cliven Bundy is he has a lifetime of experience, and he knows what his rights are. Also, what's unique about his particular position when fighting, especially the BLM, is that he has a ancestral history on that property. So even when you talk about things like FLIPMA and you in a bureaucrat, and I was in the courtroom when the head of the Utah Nevada BLM was there giving her testimony, she would refer back to the Federal Land Management Practices Act, or FLIPMA. She would refer to it quite often, and Cliven understood that even under FLIPMA, he was grandfathered, his rights were grandfathered in on that range. And so he came to bear understanding not only his constitutional rights, but the ancestral rights of beneficial use. And when he says he fired the FBI, or the BLM, excuse me, what he really means is that he ceased a contractual relationship with them, and no longer did he want them to take care of the range improvements on that tract of land he's on. Instead, he would take care of the range improvements himself. He also had a lifetime of experience watching his 53 neighbors being pushed off the land. 53 of his friends and close associates who ultimately no longer got to enjoy the life that they had always wanted to have. And he just refused. He didn't care if somebody was going to come in and buy him, try to give him money to leave. He wants to be a rancher and a farmer, and nobody's going to change that for him. And he feels that responsibility to his ancestors, and he feels that responsibility to the future generations of the Bundys. And so that's what makes him unique, is that unique mixture of conviction and his ancestral rights and his knowledge of what his own rights were, and are able to stand up. You know, Thomas Jefferson said about the colonists. Thomas Jefferson said the colonists didn't know how to fight the monarchy of the king because they were farmers, not lawyers. And in the same sense, Cliven is a farmer, but he's also, over time, become a very brilliant mind when it comes to legal issues on property possession. And that's what makes him unique.
Where do you think, based on talking with him, that, the federal government, aside from the obvious corruption that's now been exposed publicly, but where do you think the federal government has really gone wrong in dealing with ranchers in the West? And as you've talked to people across the United States, is this attitude localized to the West, or is it broader? Is there a broader problem that we need to address?
No, it's a broader problem. Just this last week, I was in Twin Falls, Idaho, and a gentleman there, just hardworking guy. You could tell, he'd just come from work. He was dirty. He came to hear what I had to say, and he started to relate a story to me that he had an entire ranch that was burnt out by the BLM. They just lit fires to burn the grass down, and it burned his mill. It burned all of his range improvements. It burned his house. And now he is working. He's basically been completely put out of business, and now he's working for a local mill just producing lumber. I was up in Chalice, Idaho, just 2 nights ago, and surrounded by. It's amazing, that's 200 miles from anything. Chalice is, and the room was packed, and it was endless stories from the ranchers there of the troubles that they have, and even many of the, or 2 or 3 anyway, of the county commissioners came, because in their county, 97% of their county, which is roughly 3.5 million acres, is now claimed to be owned by the federal government. And so they're constantly at odds against the efforts. So it's not just about desert tortoises in southern Nevada, which obviously there's not in Idaho or Washington. There's no endangered species. The desert tortoise isn't there. But there is a push to push ranchers and miners and lumbermen and so many others that work off the land. There's a push to get them removed. And it became clear down in southern Nevada. During the criminal trial, it came out that they had a policy in the early 90s, or actually the late 80s and early 90s, of no more moo by 92. That was their policy. They were going to remove all the cattle in southern Nevada, and that's why Cliven's neighbors were all pushed off the property. So it certainly is across the West. It certainly is not just in Nevada. And I know that your listeners are struggling with it as well.
So how do you think that, did Cliven give you, in all the times that you talked with him, did he give you solutions? I mean, what do you think that, some of the solutions to this are, and how do we go about addressing this? Because it's been around for a long time, and it seems like that the trajectory of the BLM in particular kind of changed a little bit with Trump coming in, but they're just kind of biding their time. And when Trump's not there anymore, they're going to continue in a trajectory of, driving ranchers off the land. How do we fight that? I mean, it seems like we need to become generational in the aspect of the fight.
Absolutely agree. Cliven will be the first one to tell you that he wants all people to be able to use the land that should be under the stewardship of a local entity, whether it's a county or a state local entity. Local people understand how to manage the land much better than a bureaucrat thousands or many thousands of miles away. He would look at it as, let's put together a local board who would mitigate and work through the issues that, whether they're environmental issues or land use issues, but for recreation or mining or agriculture, that we could work through those areas and difficulties and come up with long-term solutions. And you could really see that when we sat in and listened to the sworn testimony of the head of all of Nevada and Utah BLM. She couldn't find Hoover Dam on the map. She had no idea of the very region that she was in charge of. Hoover Dam, okay? And then as an example, she also had no idea how a cow-calf operation would work. She could not see what was wrong with The fact that the contract or the agreement that they had presented to Cliven, and she acted so benevolent about that, he could have had a contract anytime he wanted. Well, the contract that they offered him was to allow him to first to cut his cattle back by 90%, and then he could only graze them 3 months a year, June, July, and August. Well, you know what? In southern Nevada, June, July, and August is 117 degrees, and there is no grass, and there is no water. So they really offered him nothing, but she genuinely didn't understand the difference. And so it really is going to take local voices and give them the power, the locals, the power over how their land would be used, and do that in a long-term planning. That's really going to be the only solution.
So how did you come to the conclusion? Because on the book cover, you have the word terrorist crossed out, and you replace it with patriot. How did you come to that conclusion finally, and how do you respond to people who still try to call Cliven Bundy a terrorist?
Well, how I came to that conclusion, as I mentioned, in the first chapter of the book, I mentioned that I go into length that I expected him to be a wackadoo. I really did. And anybody that's going to take on the full force of the United States government the way Cliven Bundy and all of the Bundy family and all of the Bundy 19 did, that's all the men who were incarcerated there in Pahrump right alongside the rest of us, is got to be somewhat, I'm thinking they've got to be somewhat unhinged, only because of the fact that I'd gone through my own federal trial, and I know the pressure, the amazing pressure and struggle, and how difficult it is as they try to take your possessions, and they threaten to incarcerate family members, and they threaten to do anything they can to destroy you, and often do. It is tremendous. The fact that they have a 97% conviction rate, there's a reason why 97% of the people that are indicted go to prison for long periods of time. And so I expected Cliven, to be difficult and to be that guy that's just a scofflaw, the guy that's going to argue over anything. Over time, I realized just how sincere he was. Over time, he taught me about his view of the Constitution. And most importantly, when I was released from Pahrump and out of federal custody, and I actually began to research for this book, I realized just exactly what the forces were that were bearing down on Cliven Bundy, and the reason why they were bearing down on Cliven Bundy. And I realized more and more that this man was less a threat to the American public, and instead this man was a guy who more of the Americans should be emulating. And then finally, what really, for me, put an exclamation mark on that is when Judge Navarro, the supervising judge in Nevada, southern Nevada, offered to allow Cliven to be released on pretrial, he said, no, I'm not going to leave here until all the other men who are incarcerated, the remaining Bundy 19, leave. Once you release them, then you can release me free of my charges. And that should tell everybody exactly what kind of man he is. If that's not a patriot, if that's not along the lines of so many other famous men who have stood their ground, I don't know what is.
So in doing your research for the book, did you find any hidden motivation or agenda? There's been talk of mineral wealth, and that's one motivation, or solar farms, or there's been a lot of speculation thrown out there. But is there really a hidden or secret agenda behind this attempt to drive ranchers, and particularly focusing on the Bundy Ranch down there in Clark County, off the land?
It's clear, and it's not just clear by speculation or a suggestion. When Cliven was locked up, many of the Democrats that actually worked for Senator Harry Reid were public about their motivations about why they wanted that land and what was the motivation. See, all of Mojave County, or I'm sorry, the Mojave Desert down there includes all of Clark County, is under the Endangered Species Act protecting the desert tortoise. Well, as Las Vegas has sprawled out over the years, and we all know it has, from the 70s until it is today, it's quadrupled in size. Well, as it sprawled out, what has to happen is, in order to take, for commercial purposes, part of the desert or part of the habitat for the desert tortoise, they have to designate in perpetuity land for the desert tortoise to live. Well, they've established a long-time practice, and unless you're a local, you don't know it, but they've established a long-time practice of doing land swaps to mitigate that particular issue. If you go to Las Vegas, just north of Las Vegas, there's a beautiful area. It's a developed community called Summerlin. It's actually very nice. Well, they developed, Harry Reid developed a process of being able to swap land in order to give those developers that land in order to develop it. Well, quite frankly, what was going on is that around Cliven Bundy's ranch, and all you got to do is look at a map, to the west of them is a 15,000 acre solar farm. South of him is a 5,000 acre solar farm that's on a Patriot reservation. To the east of him is what's now, including most of his rangeland, the Gold Butte Monument. And of course, the one that hit the news the most, which was 150 miles away, which is the $5 billion solar project that was that the Chinese were going to put in. Now, I've had lots of people push back at me and say, well, Mike, that's not true. That's 150 miles away. No, that it is, because what they needed was that land. They needed a designated area for the tortoises to live. Well, according to those same staff members, Democratic staff members, they say, well, originally they had gone to President Obama and said, let's designate Gold Butte as one national monument, and then the tortoises would have a place to always have, a place to live, and we could put these solar farms in. Well, Obama wouldn't do it because they had just lost in the midterm elections. There was so much intensity going on, and he had lost his voter bloc, you know this better than I do, that he refused to go through the legislative process to put in a national monument, but with a promise that he would at the end of his presidency. So they became focused on Cliven's 600,000 acres. Why not? He's an old dirt farmer. He doesn't have very much money. Most people don't understand. Cliven Bundy lives in a 3-bedroom, 1-bath house that his father built in the 40s. He raised 14 children in that house. He doesn't even have a barn. He's just a simple rancher out in the middle of the desert. And they focused in on him, thinking, you know what, it becomes easy to remove him because he doesn't have the money, he doesn't have the lawyers, and we'll get him off the land, and then we'll have 600,000 acres that we can ultimately enfold into the national monument. Well, that's exactly what happened. President Obama voted on the way out the door, literally 90 days before he left office, by executive order, took over not just Cliven's ranch land, but the additional Gold Butte area, and made a national monument out of it, solidifying all the deals that were made to the environmentalists and to adhere by the law. That's what was going on down there, and that's why the timing had to happen when it happened, and why there was such a force put together, 200 armed men, and why there was such an urgency to have it done then. Even though Sheriff Gillespie said that they shouldn't try to do it at that time, they were bound and determined to do it. Because no question about that. Yeah. In the last minute that we have left, if you could tell listeners where they can find your book, where they can contact you online. You can get Cliven Bundy, American Patriot, at anywhere books are sold. Of course, on Amazon. Barnes & Noble. But where we would love you to go is to go to clivenbundy.net. That's clivenbundy.net, and you can order the book right there, along with some T-shirts and coffee cups. And my wife and I, by the way, have designated to support our royalties back to the Bundys. So when you buy a book on that page, you're also gonna help the Bundys.
So you are also going to be in Spokane Valley tomorrow night at Center Place at 7 o'clock. What can folks expect out there from you tomorrow night?
You're going to hear the whole story about Cliven Bundy and his stand, and you'll hear things that the media has never told you. And that's
well, and I hope too you're going to be signing books out there tomorrow night.
I sure intend to, and we're going to have a great time.
All right, Mike Stickler, author of Cliven Bundy, American Patriot. Thank you very much for being on the show with me today. Really appreciate you. Love you to have you on again, and I hope to catch the tail end of the event tomorrow night. I got 2 events at the same time, and I hope I get a chance to sit down and talk with you face-to-face.
Looking forward to it, Matt. Thank you so much.
All right, God bless. Okay, again, tomorrow night, 7 o'clock, Center Place. You can hear the story from Mike Stickler about Cliven Bundy, American Patriot, and the things the media didn't tell you. Hear the actual account of what's happened and what is actually continuing to happen. I mean, based on the breaking news that we had on earlier, that there is a new Larry Wooten email that the United States District Attorney moved to for an order of protection to keep out of the public eye. So this is not over. And I think it's interesting that after the vindication that's occurred, that the media has tried to keep this buried. Well, tomorrow night you can hear the real story, and Mike's going to tell it to you. It sounds like he's going to have the ability to autograph some books while you're there. And I would just take the opportunity to bring your kids too, so that they can really see as the next generation what freedom looks like. God bless.